Okay, well, we are live once again here for another round of Bother the Father. Again, this topic, any discussion, any topic you like. And since there were no questions, pre-question, I guess, really, earlier today, and the person that asked it would like to remain anonymous, so I will, respect that. The question was about vaccines in general, and what is the obligation of a faithful Catholic to whether to receive or to not receive a vaccine? And specifically was asked about the COVID vaccine. So I guess there's some fear in a way that if let's say an employer were to force someone or mandate that a vaccine be taken or any other kind of aspect that seems against the act of a conscience, what is the role of the Catholic in that situation? The person used example like going to what this person uses a concentration camp, and so, or a death camp for that matter. And so obviously the church would say that if it's a matter of life and death, obviously you always should promote life in every aspect. There are some levels of sacrifice that we're called to live as Catholics, but obviously when it comes to life and death scenarios, the church is always going to stand with life. Now, in the context of a vaccine, if let's say it doesn't go that far, but you may be forced in some way or feel compelled to do something against your conscience. And we'll say specifically for the COVID vaccine because that seems to be most relevant in this day and age. Hi.
Hey, ladies.
So when it comes to the COVID vaccine, the church has put out statements from the Archdiocesan and even from a universal standpoint to say that one can, in good conscience, either take or not take the COVID vaccine. It comes down to a matter of prudential judgment. And so what that means is, like, morally speaking, for some of the vaccines, the use of fetal stem cells, aborted stem cells, it would be morally reprehensible to actually take that vaccine. And the church would support the person's decision not to do that, even with the COVID vaccine, because it was used to, there were fetal cells used to test the vaccine. You could have a prudential judgment and say, I do not want to take that vaccine because of the way that they were tested. Perfectly acceptable, supported by the church, and no one should be forced to take the vaccine because of that moral issue. But what the church has said is that for this vaccine particularly, it's an issue of prudential judgment. And so what that means is, morally speaking, there's nothing saying you have to take vaccine or don't have to take vaccine. Either way, you would be morally sound in taking it. If you say, I don't want to take it, that's perfectly acceptable. Say, I want to take it, that's perfectly acceptable too. It comes down in that respect to a matter of prudential judgment. So maybe I have some other underlying conditions that maybe the vaccine would not be good for me from a health standpoint, or even from a secondary effect standpoint. So therefore, I shouldn't take it in conjunction with my medical professional that I've been speaking to, my doctor. Perfectly fine. Others may say, yeah, because of they're used, possibly used, and I use the word possibly because it's still not sure whether they actually were aborted stem cells used or not to actually test these vaccines. But just to remove all doubt, I'm not going to take it. Again, perfectly fine. That's prudential judgment you can take. What the church will not do, though, is give a religious exemption. Really wrong with taking the vaccine. That's a prudential issue that comes down to personal conscience. Now, what the church would say, under a conscientious objector would say, I do have a moral problem, I don't want to take it, the church would uphold and stand with that person and say they shouldn't be forced to take it. So that's really what you're hearing right now, is between a religious exemption, which the church is not going to do because of the reasons already provided, and a conscious objector, which the church will say, yeah, that person has every right not to take it and should not be forced to. So two things to be true at once. And that's really what the crux of a lot of this discussion, right? So the church would say that an employer, a government agency, anyone should not force anybody to do something they don't feel right to do, that they have a moral objection to. But also, from a religious standpoint, we have theological, philosophical reasons to say that taking the vaccine would be fine, but it comes down to a matter of personal preference or personal decision. That makes sense? Any question? It gets you can get in the weeds pretty quickly with these issues, so I just want to make sure that's very clear.
There's a lot of personal decisions that people make that the church does not condemn. Sin.
That's very true.
Yeah.
But the church would not say that taking the vaccine or not taking the vaccine would be sinful.
I understand. I'm just saying there are personal freedom things
Of course.
the church doesn't give us carte blanche to do personally what we.
Well, and that's, yeah, so I think you bring up a point. When it comes to something that's moral, so of course the church would say that, yeah, moral decisions, there are objectively right things to do and objectively wrong things to do. And we would say in a moral decision, yes, matters of conscience always direct towards the good, the true, the beautiful, and that's where morality would lie, right? The moral thing to do is always true, good, beautiful, right? Always. That's different than a discernment, which is a choice between two goods, right? And we talk about this in some other sessions too, that when we talk about discernment, whether big D discernment, and maybe study the priesthood. It's good to me to get married and have children. Those are both goods. But in discerning in God, what's the best choice for you, personally? And in the same way, you can kind of relay that to taking of the vaccine or not, that there's really not a moral issue here as far as the church is concerned, because there's certain questions about, again, where the source of these materials that were used, and because it's so far removed from the original source, you could say that there's a very, 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 very remote material cooperation by taking the vaccine, but it wouldn't be to the standard of saying that it would be a sinful action or even a moral action. But you could, for that reason, say, I don't want to take it. That's up to the individual conscious, individual decision. But that's a discernment that you would have to make for you, because there's a good in taking the vaccine, and there may be a good in not taking the vaccine. And that would be different from each individual to individual. So that's really where that would lie.
Having in pro-life circle.
It certainly is. There's a lot of discussion in the pro-life circle, and sitting on the Respect Life apostolate, that's come to the forefront several times about what should we do to take the vaccine, but the direction's always been the same. It's that, well, there could be a question raised. There could be, but even if it were true that, let's say, aborted stem cells were tested with this vaccine, not used for the actual create the vaccine, but tested, which is what the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine was used. No embryos were destroyed or created from this, and the stem cell line is so far removed from the original cells, they're not even the same cells anymore. They've been reproduced and replicated so many times since 1970, whenever it was, that they're no longer even the same cells, right? And for that reason, you justify taking the vaccine from a moral perspective on right to life and respect life.
About pro-life for the elderly, infirm, those at risk of contracting the disease, the potential effects on them.
So the same thing would apply. So if an elderly person, if they have to make a prudential judgment along with their doctor, and really kind of weigh the risk rewards, but the same thing would apply. I mean, even an elderly person who the disease may affect even to a deeper extent, can they take other precautions without taking the vaccine? Yes. Would that be a sacrifice? Yeah. Are they willing to do that? That comes down to another prudential judgment. So the church will not force that upon anybody, nor say that they were morally objectionable in taking it if they even if they say that I'm more susceptible to receiving the disease.
Do you feel this is like a little bit of a slippery slope as far as like the religious exemption and then other things that may be down the way with corporations making a judgment on whether
and that's what I'm
it's
saying.
A valid religious
yeah, and I
exemption?
think that's again why the church would say that that's the difference between a religious exemption, which we would say we can't grant that because of the reasons given, But we can give exemptions for conscientious objector.
Yeah.
Because an individual person can say, I don't want to take this for XYZ reasons, and perfectly justified. And the church would say, yeah, then you shouldn't. And we would support you in that. So, I guess if that's what you're getting at, or you have another example maybe in mind.
I have a good friend who is a nurse, and the hospital has listed on her religious exemption form what things they won't accept, like Bible verses, and like they won't count that as, as.
So somebody wearing like a Bible verse, like a pin or something?
No, just like in her statement, like that wouldn't be accepted as a thing. And I just thought that was really like a slippery slope as far as like if they're going to tell you what counts as a religious exemption and or an objection, I guess.
Yeah. I guess it would depend.
But I wasn't sure.
I guess it would depend on the. So like, you could say that a Catholic hospital could have some say in what a Catholic perspective would be on a religious objection. It would be very odd for a secular institution to say, here's what our idea of religious objection would be. Because well, you don't have any real say in that, right? It would be something like if. So maybe a better example would be if, let's say, SSM says, for Muslims, these seem like valid religious exemptions, and these don't. Well, that seems kind of odd because we have no real jurisdiction there, right? I think when we're talking about religious objection, you always have to look at the source of where that's coming from. So yeah, I would say that for a secular institution to say, here's our understanding of religious objection. I would probably want some footnotes or some, bring some receipts on that. Like, where are you getting that from? Some secular institutions may have a theologian or moral theologian or ethicist on their staff who may make determinations, but the way we understand from a Catholic perspective, religious objection is defined by the magisterium of the church. So unless a bishop has said, yep, that seems right to me, and not only a bishop, but a bishop within the jurisdiction of where that place would be, I would probably be very leery, and you may be opening yourself up to maybe more litigation. So I would more, just from a practical standpoint, not would fit my hand in that.
They are in litigation now.
That makes sense. So yeah, I would probably say that'd be right. Yeah. Good. Anyone want anything? Actually, the door's open, so if you want to use the bathroom or get some water or something, the kitchen's right there. So if anyone wants anything, please help yourself. Okay.
It's nice out.
Now it's warm.
Well, if we're not wearing a gown.
True, that's true. Well, it's all part of the sacrament.
I was going to say, you certainly would have our permission to take it off. At least you had mine.
Questions, comments, concerns, heresies?
What I want to know is, do they use any, because I've been reading these abortion things that I get in the mail, and they kind of said that some of these vaccines also have tissues from a baby.
Yeah, and we were talking about that a little bit earlier. So the current vaccines out there, the ones primarily used in the United States are Moderna, Pfizer, and Johnson & Johnson. So what the church is, what the Archdiocese and the Church Universalist said, that the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine, they had used fetal stem cells for testing, but no cells were destroyed or created from that process. And even so, the cells that were used were so far removed from the original cells, not even the same cells anymore. They've been replicated so many times, not even the original cells. And there's also a question whether actually those cells came from an aborted fetus or not. Current research says that it could have been actually from a stillborn child. So there's questions about the source of those cells, but the fact that the cells weren't destroyed or created for testing says that there's no moral objection to taking the Pfizer nor the Moderna vaccine. Now, the Johnson & Johnson did use fetal stem cells for the creation of it. And so what the church would say is that if it came down to a choice between those other two and Johnson & Johnson, if at all possible, you should go with the other two. But for the sake of health for everybody else, right, the sake of common health for everyone, if your only option is Johnson & Johnson, whether it be because of insurance issues or that's the only one you have access to, you would be morally justified in actually taking that vaccine as well. For kind of the same reasons as already presented, that these cells were kind of, they've been replicated so many times, not from original stem cell lines, they're not even the original cells, in which case they're more synthetic than really natural. So for that reason, you could be justified. But if it came down between the choice, you should probably take the other two rather than the Johnson & Johnson.
Oh, okay. You know, it also talks about they take the unborn and they put them in the freezer so that when they do decide to use it, it's all ready.
Yeah, so some
and
embryos...
It almost reminds you of the olden days when I worked at the VA.
Mm-hmm.
We had animals that
Mm-hmm.
we had. We had cow's eyes, and
Mm-hmm.
we had dogs and cats and all kinds of stuff.
For experimentation, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And for
Yeah.
research.
Yeah, so that's one of the evils of the IVF process, is that there's backup embryos that are created just in case the first one doesn't go through. And those backup ones, if they do have successful impregnation, you either destroy them or freeze them, you know, and find them, right? We would say, from a Catholic perspective, that's still morally reprehensible.
Yeah, it
It
is.
should not be done.
I mean, we're worse than Hitler.
Yeah, so I don't go that far,
yeah,
but what I would say
he
is
did experiments
what
on
what
people.
what I would say was that that process we would say is morally reprehensible. Now, that's a little bit different. I think we're talking about two separate issues. One is using a stem cell line that was obtained back in the 1970s, that the original cells have died off to the point where they're not even the original cells. Using those for scientific experimentation to develop new vaccines, new things for health issues, you know, compared to taking a frozen embryo out of the freezer, hacking it up, or extracting the material from that. That's much different than what we're talking about. And we would say if that process were used, yes, that'd be more reprehensible. You should not, in good conscience, take that vaccine. But either way, even with the COVID vaccine, it comes out of prudential judgment. So the church will also say you're morally justified in saying, because there's a question about the process anyway, I don't want to take the vaccine. And the church will say, well, that's okay. It's not forcing upon you. It's not saying you should or shouldn't. It comes down to matter of personal, conscientious discernment or choice.
Yeah.
So I think that's where the material lies. So we'll be very clear about that. Good.
I was wondering if you could explain what a plenary indulgence is.
We talked about this before, didn't we? Okay.
Oh,
So
sorry.
plenary indulgences. So I don't know how deep we want to get into this, or how back far we should go.
You can give me a quick summary.
Well, I would advise probably, was it maybe 2 or 3 sessions ago we talked about this in a little more detail. So those are online, so maybe you can go back and look at those. An indulgence in general is a remittance of temporal punishment. So when we sin, we not only offend God, we also offend our fellow human beings, right? People in the church, right? So when we go to confession, we receive an absolution which retains our, strengthens our relationship with God, repositions it, strengthens it, and then we're given a penance. And the penance is really for the remittance of temporal punishment from the effect of our sin. So it reconciles us back with the church, right? So a plenary indulgence would say that everything you've done, the effect of that sin has now been completely forgiven, to the point where if you were to die in that state, you'd go straight to heaven. There'd be no time in purgatory to actually work off that temporal punishment, right? So that's why we would say, for people who, let's say, the first Friday plenary indulgence, right? So Sacred Heart indulgence, right? You go 9 months in a row for First Friday. You also do the requirements of a plenary indulgence. You can apply that indulgence for either yourself or for somebody else. And primarily, you probably want to give it to somebody who may be in purgatory, because they could use it a little bit more than us, because we're probably going to sin again and still actually, waste it in a way. Right? So,
so that can be applied, and like that person gets like a
yeah.
pass.
So the tricky thing about a plenary indulgence though is that there are certain criteria. So one of that criteria would be to do whatever the indulgence would require. You would pray for the intentions of the Pope, pretty easy. Receive the Eucharist on that day, the indulgence would be granted, pretty easy. Go to the sacrament of confession within 21 days.
Right.
To be in a state of grace, which is a little bit tougher maybe. And then also to be detached from all temporal or material things. That's the tricky one, right? So what does that really mean? Well, okay, I like ice cream, right? I really like ice cream. If I go a week without ice cream, that's gonna be a problem for me, right? That's attachment. That's material attachment, right? So if I'm trying to get an indulgence that state, I'm not really getting the plenary indulgence because I still have this attachment to ice cream, right? It's difficult to actually maintain that, right? But even if I didn't get the plenary indulgence, I'm still getting a partial indulgence for whoever I'm praying that for, and that's still efficacious. Okay. So yeah, the free of all temporal attachment is tricky. Part of the problem is I can't tell you if you're in that state, right? I can't tell you. Only person who really define that or say that would be the person doing it. And it's really the same thing with sin. I can't tell you if what you're doing is a mortal sin. I can say if I'm doing it, it's a mortal sin. But I can't say if you're doing it if it's a mortal sin, or sin at all for that matter. And that's the difference between a moral or immoral moral action and a sin. A moral act is always something objective. Hey, robbing that bank is not a good idea. I don't think that's a good thing to do, right? But I can't say that it's a sin for the robber. Only person who can say that is the robber. Because I don't know if that person knows it's wrong to actually take to somebody else. I don't know if that person, maybe that person is compelled in some way, not making a free act to do that, right? So I can't God can judge that, I cannot. So if someone were to come to confessional and starts, rolling off their sins, I'm assuming they're mortal because you're here confessing them. Now they may be venial, but that's up to the person confessing to actually decide. Either way, it's good to confess them, but I can't say if it's mortal or not because I'm not the one doing it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. No, that's good. Thanks.
You can't decide if they're mortal. I mean, aren't there certain sins it's pretty obvious that they're mortal sins? I mean, like if a person comes in and confesses they killed somebody.
Well, let's go down that route. Let's say someone comes in, and maybe to put it in a different perspective. Let's say a man comes in and says, I drove my girlfriend last week to the abortion clinic to have an abortion. Now, okay, that's pretty wrong. The fact you're here shows that you understand that there's some morality to that, right? Now, when we talk about mortal, though, there's two other criteria. So the first criteria is it's bad. Objectively, it's bad, right? The second criteria would be I know fully that it's bad. I have a full understanding that doing this is wrong. And the third act would be I'm fully consenting to do it anyway, right? So let's go that scenario. Let's say that young man is getting family pressure. Let's say his girlfriend's parents are really pressuring him. Says, we're going to cut you off unless you abortion. Let's say his parents are saying, yeah, you know what, you should leave her. That's it. Game over. This is not a good thing for you. Just get it done. Call it quits. Right? Your future is going to be over. I would probably argue that's not full consent. Right? There's not a free action involved with that. Still wrong, but I don't think that would hit the level of mortal sin because there's not a free consent to that action. So that's where it lies. That's where the state of mortal sin lies. That's what we call the state of mortal sin because there's a lack of that understanding, or there's a full understanding you're still maintaining it, right? So I'm not. That's not to say there's certain people out there that recognize that this is wrong and I shouldn't do it, but I'm still doing it, right? And
You still have to keep it a secret if somebody tells you that they murdered somebody.
Are you talking about me as a priest?
Mm-hmm.
I cannot violate the seal of confession ever. ever.
So that's still in effect.
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure because,
Always, and it always will be.
well, you see these movies and then you wonder.
Well, there's the problem. I would start there first. Let's look at that first, right? Yeah, no. So, like in that circumstance, I can't say for sure if that's a mortal sin because, again, I'm not the person doing it. And you can say the culpability is greatly reduced because of the circumstance the person finds themselves in. Right. Now, if the person came in and said, "Yeah, you know what? I drove my girlfriend to the abortion clinic. She got an abortion. And, I'm not really sorry about it. I think that was the right choice." Okay. That may have a deeper discussion. And my counsel there would be, well, are you sorry that you're not sorry for it? Because in the confessional, that's all this requires, some kind of contrition. Some contrition. That's all I need to forgive that sin. That's it. So when we talk about the levels of moral, we can say that, yeah, immoral, sure, for sure. Objectively speaking, that's always going to be immoral. Sinful, I cannot make that determination. I cannot. The only person who can tell that to me is the person doing it.
What if somebody comes back with still feeling a lot of guilt about, what they did? I mean, it's, maybe they were pressured into it, but yet they knew it was wrong.
Yeah. So I'm not saying, okay, so I guess the question, I'm not saying that it's not sinful.
Right.
I'm saying it may not be the mortal sin, right?
Right.
Venial, sure. At least venial, I would say sure. Mortal, I don't know. That's a high bar to hit the mortal sin, right? That's a pretty high bar. And so even let's say someone came in and said, "Hey, I just killed a person." Well, I mean, the fact you're here shows you probably knew better. But the circumstance could, was it a crime of passion? Was there deliberation in this? Were you planned to kill your husband? Was that something you were writing down plans and stuff? And that could, that shows there's a deliberation going on. And there was at least a decision made. Whereas if we're let's say a crime of passion, well, your culpability will be greatly reduced in that circumstance because it's not the deliberation that actually occurs. It's pure act, right? And
in a way that's kind of where, when a person's charged with murder, how it ends up being first degree, second degree, third degree, manslaughter, whatever, because there's all those qualifiers, same kind of qualifiers.
And here's the funny thing about it. Where do you think they got that? Yeah. Hello, hi, hello, yeah. Right? So yeah, it's always important to ask those questions, and I think that's so I guess the question would be, is the confessional a proper time to actually make that distinction and get down into the weeds of that? I would argue no. Right? Now that's not to say that priests can't give counsel. Priests should give counsel in those respects, right? And the counsel probably goes something like, well, have you turned yourself into the police? Are you planning to do that? I think that's something you may want to do. And I encourage you, please, come talk to me outside the confessional after we're done here so we maybe have a deeper discussion. Right? But as far as maybe those things, spiritual direction is more where that would probably be hashed out. Right? Well, why do you think you had this feelings? Or why do you think you had this anger? Or why do you think you were doing what you were doing? That's kind of the goal of spiritual direction, is to get the root of why these things are occurring so you can actually overcome them. The confessional is the seat of mercy. And that's not to say counsel shouldn't be given in that respect. That's part of the right too. But to actually dig into, well, why do you think you're doing that? That really wouldn't be proper for the sacrament of confession. Make sense? Okay. All right, well, short night. Beautiful, great. Okay. We got a few people watching online. We got 4 online, so anyone online wants to ask some questions. I'm looking at the comments now, so feel free. Otherwise, if anyone here has some questions or a question.
When you mentioned the seat of mercy, I guess that's what's been on my mind for this whole discussion on vaccines, which I don't think has really come up as, yes, prudence in your judgment and discernment and so forth. But what I've been trying to take it back to is, how can I offer mercy and forgiveness if this was done through these stem lines of the early 1970s and so forth? Can I have a heart to forgive the mothers, forgive the people, the medical professionals that performed these, acts, and having mercy and forgiveness to the moms, and just it's a whole nother side that I really haven't heard discussed, but that's what's been going through my mind.
Yeah. At the root of that, I think, is there's supernatural virtue, right, given to us by gifts for our baptism. Then there's heroic virtue, right? That's like the high epitome of the gift of virtue. And the heroic virtue we see in the lives of the saints, right? So, I think I'm getting mixed up, but I'm pretty sure. St. Gianna, great example, right? St. Gianna, she was a mother of 4. She was having a child, or I think it was her 4th or 5th child. And the doctors told her, well, you know what, you have some problems going on, and really you should terminate the pregnancy, right? Again, we can do some operations with the thought, the hope that everything's going to be fine. From a moral standpoint, we call that the principle of double effect. That a woman who is pregnant can have a procedure done with the intention of actually healing, even if there's a chance that the side effect, maybe the child will die, right? That's not the direct purpose of the operation, that's not the direct purpose of the procedure, but there is a large chance that could happen. Morally speaking, St. Gianna would have been completely justified in getting that procedure, even if her child died. But the heroic virtue exhibited there, which has made her a saint, was that she said, no, I'm going to bear this child, and if I die, I die. Because the life of my child is more important than my life. Lay down my life for my friends, right? We would call that heroic virtue. That kind of goes above and beyond a regular moral decision, right? That's kind of what you're getting at. It's saying that, yeah, I mean, I know we're called to forgive, and like, well, it could be an act of heroic virtue to say, I forgive these people that are doing this, even back then because they were ignorant, maybe because they didn't know any better, maybe because they didn't recognize God in their life. What's very interesting when it comes to a lot of these actions back, when abortion was becoming legal, a lot of people that were involved in that movement back in that time converted to Catholicism because they said, wait a minute, there's something wrong here, and something is not right. And through that, in a way, it's kind of beautiful that you have an act of conversion through evil, and shows that God can work even in those moments to bring about good. And you can say, yeah, how horrible it is they had a hand in killing these millions of children. Yeah. And they're living with that.
Yeah, and I don't want to say that the good that has come out of it overrules the bad, the evil that was done. It doesn't. It doesn't overrule it. But God's still merciful and forgiving, and that's what He's calling us to.
Right. I think the principle to keep in mind there too is God is the source of all justice and mercy. And in the eyes of God, mercy is justice, right? And the reason being is because we talk about the sacrament of confession, right? That being the sacrament of confession is where justice and mercy meet, right? Because we can never repay back to God what was done to Him. We can't. In justice, we just cannot do that. He's an infinite being. We are a limited people. He is the source of all goodness and grace, and we are fallen. We can't do it. That's why we need Jesus to come and do what He did, because we could never pay the debt on our own. So thank God He did. But God still loves us so much that He sheds that mercy upon us in abundance that we don't deserve. Now we can, though, repay back the people that we've offended. The church, the people, right? That's where penance comes into play. So that's where justice and mercy meet. We can give justice back to our fellow brothers and sisters, but we can't give justice back to God. And so from God's perspective, what's the most just thing to do? Well, to give us mercy. And the reason He does that is because, well, we ask for it. And we understand we can't repay Him for what He's done for us. So I think that's really what you're getting at, is that, yeah, okay, where does justice and mercy end for us, right? Where can I say if somebody offends me, that I should give them justice. Well, you can, but also we recognize that justice will be given in the end too. So let's say you have someone who converts completely to the church, even though they've maybe lived a life of horrid sin and everything else. Well, will they have to repay back that debt in some way? Well, yeah. Now, would that be in purgatory here on earth? I don't know. That's up to God. But the debt would have to be repaid in some way. Whether that be through the penance given by the priest, or whether that be in some other mortification or other indulgence done through life, well, we trust that it's still going to be repaid no matter what. Because the debt that's owed up each other is still needs to be repaid. Some way. Does that help? Okay.
I was just trying to relate it to the vaccines even.
Yeah.
That perspective.
Yeah. I mean, some people say it comes down to a deep discussion about, and I understand this too because I was kind of in this world where, as an engineer, there's always this kind of thought about like, well, if God didn't want us to do something, He wouldn't like give us this intellect or this ability to do these things, right? And so, if God didn't want us to develop these, vaccines or IVF or all this other stuff, well, then why would He allow us to do that?
Because He's given us free will.
Well, that's the thing. From a scientific standpoint, the guiding principle is, well, we can do it, therefore we should, right? And it's kind of funny because, like, I don't know if I really like the movie, but like Jurassic Park. You ever see Jurassic Park?
Yeah.
There's a great line in there. Dr. Malcolm's like, yeah, we kind of focus so much on if we could do, we never asked if we should.
Oh, yeah.
And that's where the ethics comes into play. That's why ethics is so important, is that, that throws in that aspect of, even though you can do it, doesn't necessarily mean you should do it, because we are given that gift of free will. We are given the choice to either do this or not do this. And we're also given the intellect and the choice to say, well, should we be doing this? What are the effects of, what are the pros and cons of doing this, right? How is this ethical? What is the ethics behind this? Even though the goal might be good, are the means of getting there good? Because the ends do not justify the means either. And so that should be asked at all points of a scientific process. And unfortunately, I think we see that today, where science becomes this all-knowing, all-encompassing whole direction that we're all leading to. That becomes the sole purpose of our life. We don't ask those other questions about, is this really good to do? Is this really the best way to do this? Is this really the most efficacious way of doing it? What are the consequences of me doing this? Because the intention, I think, is good. It may be a false sense of charity, or maybe a false sense of faith in the way it gets there, but there's at least some faith and there's some charity involved with it. But we as church would always say that the maxim would be, you have to have the right way of getting there too. And that's where ethics comes into play. Good. Well, let's see. All right, so 2 questions online. How do you know when you're right for a spiritual director, or that might be a naive question? Well, I don't think it's naive. I guess the question is, how should I get a spiritual director? And my answer to that would be, yeah. There's really nothing wrong. There's really nothing wrong with getting the spiritual director. Spiritual directors can be very helpful when you're discerning something, right? Or even help you maybe kind of overcome a moral challenge that's happening in your life, right? I mean, a lot of people, come to confession, they confess the same thing over and over again. I think, it's common. What a spiritual director can help you do is find the root of why that's happening, right? And maybe give you some techniques, some strategies on how to overcome that. But also in discernment, like if you have whether it be big D discernment or little d discernment, a spiritual director can kind of help you, guide you where God may be leading you in those questions, right? And give you some insight as far as that's concerned. So I don't think it'd ever be wrong to get a spiritual director. I would say that the spiritual directors are few and far between, just because, let's put it this way. Spiritual director is a canonical term, right? Properly speaking, a spiritual director is an ordained man by canon law. That's different than a spiritual guide. So anyone can be a spiritual guide. And so if that's what you're looking for, people can do that for you, right? There's many holy people in this parish, are much holier than I, who probably be great spiritual guides. But that's not the same thing as spiritual director. So yeah, great. I'd say if you feel you're called to that, pursue it. Do it. No problem. So yeah, I think if you feel called, great. Any questions about that? All right. Okay. So here's how can we discern the will of God? When is the right time to fight or struggle against oppression, or should we accept any oppression that comes our way? So that's kind of what the spiritual director would help you with, right, to make those determinations. As we talk about in other discussions, the key to a good discernment is, does the outcome give me a sense of peace, joy, happiness? If the answer to that is yes, that's from God. If the outcome gives me a sense of fear, anger, anxiety, that's not from God. And if the outcome gives you a sense of ambiguity, that's probably you, right? So that's not to say that if you have peace, joy, happiness, and thought of the outcome, that there won't be roadblocks, right, in the way. We call that spiritual warfare. And a spiritual director can help you, persevere through those things, right, to get to that goal you're looking to. Now, whether now the time to fight or struggle, well, that I think is different for everybody. The gospel passage that comes to mind is Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus is saying, talks about, if you're asked to go 1 mile, go 2. If you're asked to give your cloak, give your tunic. And one of that is turn the other cheek. Now, maybe our 21st century ears hear that and says, oh, okay, Jesus talking about being meek. It's like, okay, we'll take it, right? Just whatever comes, just take it. But what Jesus is really saying there is it's actually a very manly thing he's saying. What he's saying, that's an internal disposition to say, when you get hit in the face, it's almost like, is that all you got? Is that all you got? Try again, That's really the concept of what Jesus is really saying there, right? It's not being meek and like a doormat. It's being strong in the face of that adversity. To the point where we're saying, nothing you can do can really offend me or oppress me or really hurt me, because God's on my side, right? So when to fight back, if that's really what the question. I think there are times when there's injustice, when there is evil being done. Yeah, of course we should fight back. We should defend life at all costs, whatever that may be, right? Or even state of life for all costs, right? That is always something we're called to do as Christians. But it's always in the name of justice and truth and goodness. So when that's being affected, yeah, we have an obligation to stand up as Christians and say, this isn't right. Right? Now, whether that means take up arms or whether it means maybe write your congressman, well, there's a lot of steps in between there. And it's always in the right prudential judgment in the right context. Okay? So the answer to that question, I think that's where you have to kind of leave it, is that it's always prudentially done in the right context, directed towards goodness, truth, and unity. If something like that's being violated, then yeah, we have a right to fight, metaphorically speaking, right? So yeah, so good.
Well, I heard on the radio that you guys, this parish, that this is one of the best parishes in the world, because there's a gentleman on 101.
Which radio?
101.9 FM, and him and his wife both had cancer. They were parishioners. They're still parishioners in here. Their name is Paul.
Well, we're on the internet. Let's say all right.
All right. Yeah. But anyway, they said because of this parish, they were able to defeat cancer, because both of them. She had cancer first, and she had breast cancer, and then right after she had finished her last treatments, and they said everything was clear, she said she just felt great. And then her husband discovered he had gastrointestinal cancer.
Wow.
And so what they said radio was all the good things that Saint Gabriel did for them. And they said it in South St. Louis.
Oh.
This is the only one I know of.
Yeah.
And they said that the people helped them with food and prayers and everything. They said that they would have never been able to make it without this spirit.
I can't say that's surprising. I mean, I found this is my third year here, we have some very good people in this parish. Very, very good people. And I think there are good people everywhere in every parish. Every parish has a different personality. But yeah, I think that doesn't surprise me.
I know, but it was just wonderful to hear it because I mean they repeated St. Gabriel at the beginning and at the end of all their
Well, good.
and they said that they
You got some
helped
good
them
press.
in everything. They need
Yeah.
Great.
Right.
That's always nice.
Well, you'll see some more people at Mass on Sunday.
Yeah.
All right. Excellent. All right. Yeah, I think that's true. I think we have some very good people here, for sure. So, awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, it is 7:45, so we can call it an early night if you guys want, unless there's any other final questions or anything pressing. All right. Well, thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank you, Father.
Appreciate y'all coming out. We'll see you next week, if not sooner.
Okay.
Oh, next week is, we'll still have regular Bow of the Father, so the week after we'll do a Friends from the Faith. I'm still trying to figure out what we're going to do for that, so we'll figure that out as we go. All right, everybody, have a good night.
Thank you.